Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 310 or 310. My name is John Logan, and I wish to offer a happy Thanksgiving to all of our American listeners out there. Canada had Thanksgiving months ago, so now I kind of get to be super jealous of everyone down in the States who are enjoying their Thanksgiving fixings. And to be honest, that's just about the only thing I am jealous about regarding the States right now. After Thanksgiving, of course, is December. And it's going to be a packed month. And I'm not just talking about all the holidays. We have the Game Awards, of course. We have our yearly most anticipated games feature coming out. And of course, like I said, the holiday seasons. So stay tuned for that. We also have quite a few high-profile previews that have recently come out. And we're going to be chatting about those today. So joining me today for this Thanksgiving feast of video games is a first-timer to the podcast, Mark.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here.
Yes, and it's funny because neither of us celebrate American Thanksgiving.
That's true.
In fact, you don't celebrate Thanksgiving at all.
No, I'm just happy to be here and be part of it. So, yeah, congratulations to everyone in America who's listening.
Yes, and Zach is also with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So anyway, first up, we're going to be talking about an upcoming game from one of my all-time favorite studios, Obsidian Entertainment, Avowed. Super excited about this friggin' game. So, Avowed. I'll give you a little bit of backstory. Obsidian Entertainment was founded back in 2003 by former Black Isle studio developers. They were the team that was known for Baldur's Gate, Fallout, huge into CRPGs, and the Black Isle Studios just kind of, I guess, well, CRPGs aren't profitable anymore. I guess we're getting rid of them. So they did, and they went off and they formed their own studio, and it's a good thing that they did. So their first major project was the sequel to Knights of the Old Republic, KOTOR 2, The Sith Lords, and they did a great job of picking up KOTOR and developing it, and they, it's a really, it's still a beloved game. Then, of course, they really hit their stride with Fallout New Vegas. Bethesda hit gold with Fallout 3, and they're like, we need a new one, and we don't have time. So they gave it to Obsidian. And Obsidian delivered what is arguably still the best Fallout game, New Vegas. And yeah, it was a brilliant game with branching narratives, memorable characters, so much choice involved in that game. It's still incredible. Then 2 years after it released, they embraced a brand new platform, Kickstarter, and they put their new project, Pillars of Eternity, up, and it was a return to the isometric CRPG style, and they wanted to deliver a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate, and it was a hugely successful Kickstarter and a hugely successful game. Since then, they have made many other games. They did the stunningly, surprisingly good South Park RPG, The Stick of Truth. They did, of course, Pillars of Eternity 2, and they did a spiritual successor to Fallout called The Outer Worlds, which I really like. I really like The Outer Worlds. I think that The Outer Worlds has a lot of places it can go, especially in the sequel. But you know what? They looked at this and they realized Pillars of Eternity, that's where the roots are. And they wanted to continue to explore this world, but presumably, I guess they were worried. Maybe they thought the interest wasn't there for CRPGs. Baldur's Gate 3 certainly disproved that. But they decided, you know what, we're going to go first-person RPG, but we're going to set it in the same world as Pillars of Eternity. And that is where Avowed got its start. This was announced in 2020. So it's been a few years now since it was announced. People looked at this and they said, wow, that looks like the Obsidian version of Skyrim, because everyone, I guess, remembers New Vegas and Bethesda, giving them the Fallout. So they are developing this game. It's not Skyrim, but clearly people who love Skyrim are equally excited for this. Now, Mark, you recently actually got to play a pretty extensive preview of Avowed. I'm just curious, what's it like? How is it? Just like broad strokes.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good experience. It, like you said, it's very much ties into the Skyrim way of doing things. It's an FPS RPG with all the bells and trappings you'd expect, but it does cater quite nicely to the world they've established in the Pillars universe. So it still really ties into that. It's a part of the world of Eora and the Living Land. So they moved away from the Deerwood, which was the kind of temperate setting from the first game. They moved away from the Deadfire Archipelago, which was the sort of tropical setting of the second game, and now we're in the Living Lands. And it's really what you'd expect. Like you said, it ties into Skyrim. It builds on a lot of the work they've done, I feel, in, like you say, the Outer Worlds, particularly with some of the newer mechanisms and systems in there. And they've obviously learned a lot and poured a lot of that in. And yeah, it feels good to play. It feels smooth. I do think it takes in a lot of, as I say, what you'd expect a lot of recent FPS RPGs to have. And I think it will be interesting to see after the preview and once the full game's released, what else to do with some of those systems and what else it offers. Because I think at the moment it's quite vanilla. It all works really, really well. I think if you're a fan of Skyrim, anything in that vein, it's going to be a really good game to have a look at. But I think it's what to do with those systems. There wasn't anything really that made me think, this is completely new. But I think everything it did, it does well.
Yeah, so it's refining what they already do. Which, like you said, Obsidian does it really well. Obsidian does choice-based RPGs exceptionally well. The first thing that I guess, if you're familiar with the Pillars of Eternity series, the world is obviously isometric, and this shifts that world into first-person gameplay, which is arguably much more immersive. How well do you know this world, out of curiosity?
Yeah, I mean, I know it quite well. I would say that a bit like yourself, the two earlier games are two of my favourite games. I love the isometric aspect. It allowed them to really bring forth that classic, asset-heavy, lore-heavy approach. It was just full of that deep world building, every scene, there was stuff in the background going off. You'd have all the dialogue, the narrative dialogue, the highlighted lore words. It would really build that up. There's a huge amount of work that they've put into the history of the world, the way the gods related. For folk who've played that game, that was a really key part, the metaphysics of it and how those gods relate. It really just lives and breathes through that setting. And I think that, looking at Avowed, that is going to pull through. It's more subtle and it's not as kind of in your face. But I think the way it's set up, I feel hopefully that, having only played the preview, that is going to come through, because I think that's a real strength, that core part of the world is something that they do really, really well. And I think it would be a shame if they don't really pull through from that in Avowed.
I suspect they will. What was it like exploring this world that you know so well all of a sudden in a first-person perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, exploration is smooth. You can jump, you can crouch, you can sprint. As I've just said, it's all familiar FPS trappings in that respect. Lots of verticality. I think what was quite cool is, being able to be in a world and suddenly have lots of different, levels, right from being able to get into, you can swim in the game, you can go underwater, you can find the nooks and crannies and explore those, right up into, more vertical places. I alluded into the preview of like a tall lighthouse, or a lighthouse that's got scaffolding around it. There's various jumps and grabs you can make, and it does seem like they've put a lot of parkour-esque elements into that, and I think some of the actual sort of platforming almost elements into something they've built in, which is new. I suppose what was most strange is the fact that it's not going to be as content heavy. The very first settlement where the preview's set, you're normally used to having dozens of NPCs. A lot of them would have dialogue or lore content or shout outs. There's just not as much as that. So it's just getting, I think, their head around the fact that it's just not going to be quite as heavy and as detailed as, the isometric version. But yeah, going around was great. The Adra formations are there. You've got callbacks to that from how they were presented in the game, and even some of the ability and combat effects, particularly with the grimoires and the magic you can pick up, do hark back to the original games.
Yeah, the fascinating thing I find about this is, I guess it's more work to create a fully immersive 3D world than it is to create an isometric one. But hopefully, I understand what you mean, that there's going to be a little bit less, I guess, fewer NPCs. It's not going to be quite as immersive in that way. But my hope is that because it's a smaller scale, in terms of the people you meet, the world, it's going to be a lot more focused. So hopefully they tell a focused story, because otherwise it's just, like you said, if people are going into this expecting Pillars of Eternity levels of content, they are probably going to be disappointed. But if they go into this expecting a really focused story with some interesting characters and companions and things like that, it sounds, based on your preview, like this is not going to be a disappointment at all.
No, and I think it's just clarifying that, and knowing that actually it's the open zone approach, So the preview takes place in Dawnshore, which is a southern area of the Living Land. It's a self-contained open area zone. So within there's places to explore, there's side quests to pick up, there's secrets and mysteries to be found. As the masters of environmental storytelling, I only scratch the surface of some of the stuff that's there. Little cool nooks and crannies, stories that you can tell. But I think if you go into it with that, knowing that's the case, then I think you won't be disappointed. I think the only thing for me which kind of took out as again, broad strokes is, and I suppose it was an interesting choice for how Obsidian have developed the preview, I guess, and this is looking at other previews as well and other, looking online at social media reaction, I suppose it is quite vanilla-esque in terms of, you start off in a coastal, area. It's very much, a coast. You're shipwrecked. You go through some sea caves. You go into a fortress. You move into kind of a tropical-based settlement. Mm-hmm. There's nothing really that's kind of a wow, that's different, or wow, that's cool, or whoa, this is a completely different land. I have to say, it does feel a bit Deadfire-esque. And I think that's just one thing that, as I was playing through, I thought, I hope that, the preview will go on to the sort of creativity and the sort of stuff that they do, because my worry is it may not grab some of the more casual player in, because it feels a bit safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. The combat in Pillars of Eternity, it's a CRPG. Technically, it's real time, but it does have, pause the action. It's very much positioning. It's isometric. Whereas here, they're going, obviously, it's a first person game, so it's going to be real time combat. And one of the things that they've really been focusing on when they've been talking about this is the way that they are handling classes and the ability to use various items or various weapons and things like that. I wanted to ask you about the combat in this game, because you can seamlessly switch between spells, your swords, or various other weapons, guns, things like that. What does that level of choice do to the combat? Like, is it fast, fun? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, it works really well, I think. Over the course of the preview, got access to, various heavier weapons or lighter dagger weapons. You can find a grimoire, and that equips sort of spells which you can use in your offhand. You can use a shield in the offhand if you want more chance to block. And the idea is that you can just switch between those particular combinations and see how that feels. So I settled on a combination where I sort of kept the spear and then just had, the spells in the offhand, but it meant that I couldn't really effectively block. So it was a lot of dodging, a lot of using my spells to try and freeze an enemy and then run up and stab it. But I could have played it more with the shield just to give me that block and then just go for an all-out attack. So it did feel good. I was a little bit apprehensive about that because, I think we've all got memories of Skyrim-esque combat. It sometimes doesn't always give you that feedback, but it does work quite well. They've got quite a cool mechanic for the stamina, which is as you'd expect. You get hit, if you make an attack, you lose stamina. But they've also worked into a system whereby, depending on the weapon you use, and I know the devs have done a lot of work looking at this, the impact on the enemy is more represented. So if I'm really, going hell for leather on a Zauri with a double-handed, two-handed sword or two-handed axe, I'm knocking it to the ground, it's being knocked away, I can follow it up, there's a real sense of physicality, and it's the same when you take damage as well. Heavier armour does stop that kind of interruption and that kind of knockback. So actually that was something that I did feel added a little bit of strategy to it. Yeah, I could use a heavier, more powerful weapon, but A, it would be slower, and B, I may not be able to get another swing in just whilst, even if the enemy's on the floor. So it works well. There's another added system as well with stun. So the more that you strike an enemy, you build up a stun gauge, like a yellow gauge bar on the UI. And once that's filled, you can sort of activate an extra sort of attack. So it may be where you slow down time and deliver 3 critical hit blows. So overall, it felt good. There was that usual dodging, usual strafing, running back and forwards. I'd hesitate to say it's Skyrim-esque. It is very similar, but I do think it does do something slightly differently.
You mentioned, we were talking a second ago about the environments and how there is verticality and various other things. How does that play into the combat at all in terms of, like, I guess I'm picturing, It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few sort of set piece battles, ambushes where you're walking in there. There's Arabs are on across a gap and they're shooting at you. They're across a bridge and they're shooting at you, and you've got to kind of work out, am I going up to them? And I'm going to try and shoot with a bow back at them. So certainly the AI seems to take that into function, and you've got to consider that. In terms of making attacks from height, that's there as well. You can really knock them to the floor. So I think the whole setup, the way the environment's structured, the way the environment's been designed, does lend itself quite well to that. And I think that'd be something else that would be interesting to explore further. I think the only other thing to add as well is, and again, John, this is something new, is they've introduced a stealth mechanic, and it's very similar. I know you mentioned the Outer Worlds in your intro. It's similar if you remember the going to the little red alien plants and hiding in them. There's elements of the game where they've almost use that system directly. Different kind of bushes, different low-growing plants, crouching down, a kind of coloured toggle if the enemies have detected you or not detected you, and then you can actually also complete a lethal takedown as well. So that's something that's been added in that does help for combat, and certainly some of the bigger combats when you've got a number of enemies in that particular area, you need to kind of use it to thin the crowd. So that's something new, and I did enjoy that.
That's neat. Which is nice. I mean, I like hearing that because I like playing stealthy games like this.
Yeah.
It's my preferred style of play, actually. One of the things about the environments, this called to mind something that you wrote in your preview. One of the things that Obsidian does extremely well in the Outer Worlds, and certainly in New Vegas, is environmental storytelling and little things like going into a house and like seeing touches of the people who own it, or like when you explore, finding stories that may or may not even have, I guess, audio logs, just like environmental stories. And one of the things you mentioned here is that you jumped and you fell into a tree, and inside the tree was another backpack full of gear. And that really got your mind racing. Are there any other moments like that in the game, or was that an isolated one?
No, I think there's a moment sort of midway through the preview where you've just left the first fortress, and the fortress itself is full of stuff like that. You've got all these. I mean, I won't give too many spoilers away. You've got all these bodies. You can obviously see stuff's happened, and you can kind of see maybe they've been fighting each other. You've got those hands outstretched. The bodies are together. You move into an area just before you leave the very first part of the tutorial, which is more like a mysterious cave area. An ancient area where people used to worship, and you can just see there's lots of nooks and crannies in the caves where there might be bone piles where there may have rituals may have taken place. There's some sort of chalk carvings on the side of the rock walls where there's maybe of been part of that ritual. So it just builds up that sense of actually someone's been here before, something's happened, there's a story to this land. And then that goes right into the first settlement, which is a settlement called Paradise, which is the settlement that the story kind of intends to send you to. It's the first area where the main quest or the main storyline needs to happen. And that's full of that classic, tropical settlement, vines growing everywhere, lots of growth, hanging from, the wooden settlement structures, boards starting to decay, falling off, big gaps in the provision. There's a shanty town where everything's just falling off, looks like it's fallen into the coastal bay. You just really feel that they've really kept that dedication to detailing the assets and in the art that's used. Everything felt very bespoke, and I thought that was something that, yes, it's different to the first two games, but that commitment to keeping the world real and keeping the world having that story behind it, I feel was still there, even though the viewpoint's different.
The greatest thing I find about making the world feel real is that when you are immersed in that kind of environment, it actually dramatically makes the importance of your choices even more magnified. Like if the world is boring or feels artificial, who the hell cares? But when you're in this real world, then you can feel like you can genuinely impact this world. That really does raise the stakes. And Obsidian is known for their player choice. I mean, again, New Vegas is probably still to this day, 14 years later, one of the gold standards of involving like player choice and how you can impact the world just through your actions. Avowed theoretically also involves nuanced player choices. In the preview, like again, this is just a preview. We haven't played the whole game, but in this preview, how did your choices impact the overall narrative and the world itself?
It's an interesting point that, Jono, because I think in the preview there didn't feel to be that many big impacts. So it still uses the system as using the previous two games, where depending on your statistics you put into strength or perception, you'll be able to unlock dialogue choices based on, how many attributes are in there and the view of the other, if an NPC you're talking to. So there were many, many occasions where I could unlock dialogue where, I could have my warrior be a bit ballsy, or I could have them kind of take the initiative, or I could have them be nice or be kind. And that did then reflect in how the NPC viewed me and their dialogue from that point on. But there are other cool moments as well. Again, in the first part of the tutorial, you get a companion straight away, but a bit midway through the first part, you can actually pick up sort of an optional companion who's kind of locked up, who you need to complete almost a sort of mini sort of side quest to decide to do that. But you can just literally walk straight past them in that classic Obsidian manner, and just you will never know anything about them. You could just get to the end. And similarly, once you get to the main part of the open zone world, there's different ways to approach things there. A cool one was just finding a band of grave robbers who just happened to be trying to grave rob one of the local cemeteries. You can either tell them off and hopefully put them on the way if you've got your statistics in the right attributes to do that, or you can just wail on them and decide that actually you want to punish them for doing that, or you can just wail on them and loot the stuff they've looted anyway. So, there were definite elements where that choice was coming through. And again, the way it did it here definitely reminded me of the Outer Worlds in terms of some of, the way that structured those choices.
It's interesting because the Outer Worlds, I'm going to preface this by saying I really do enjoy the Outer Worlds, really, really enjoyed the Outer Worlds. I reviewed the game and both DLCs, one of which I loved, one of which I did not. However, one of the complaints about the Outer Worlds is that for a spiritual successor to Fallout, the worlds, I guess, felt very small. It didn't feel as expansive as any of the recent Bethesda era Fallout games. Avowed, with the understanding that you have not played the whole game, how big does Avowed feel so far? Does it feel like a small world, or does it feel like it's going to be a fairly expansive open world feel? I understand that this is not an open world game; there are different biomes, but how did it feel while you were playing it?
I think it definitely felt more akin to. I mean, I suppose we could give a recent example, and I'm loath to do this to too much, but it wasn't that dissimilar from maybe the size of some of the open world zones in the recent New Dragon Age, in the sense of, you've got a self-contained zone, you've got self-contained boundaries, there's areas within it you can go to and conduct an activity, a side mission, a mystery, there'll be something to see, and then presumably you'll move on to the next zone. So the Dawn Show zone that's set in the preview didn't feel like the biggest, but there was certainly enough there for, to get into, and surely there'd have been things that I wouldn't see in the limited time I had. The overall world map looks like it's going to be made up of probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen of these zones, looking at how big it's mapped out as an actual, diagram. So I think you're right that I think for folk listening, I really don't think it's going to be, like you say, comparisons to New Vegas, comparisons to any of the full open world FPSs, RPGs.
Let's just say Skyrim.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the best comparison. And to be fair to Obsidian, they have been clear, haven't they, when they've said, look, that's not what we're aiming for. We're aiming for a more self-contained experience. And I think that the way they've designed it absolutely meets that. It's open. It's definitely open enough for that, I feel. And I'm excited to see what the other zones are and how big they are and how much you can do in them. We'll see.
It's the interesting thing. I think that a lot of gamers and a lot of game journalists too, they do have open world sickness on the brain, which they once video games reached the point where open worlds were possible, and specifically immersive open worlds with interesting things, games went crazy with them. And I mean, to an extent, a lot of them still do. But in the recent years, there has been a push for many games and RPGs to scale that back. So it's like, you're going to have a lot to explore. Don't worry. And there's going to be lots of exploration. We're going to pull the best of the open world, but we are going to be providing different zones that are open exploration within that. I don't want to call them walled gardens, because if they were, they'd be pretty big walled gardens. But breaking it up in that way can make exploring a lot more accessible, I guess you could say, to people who are playing, because it's it's more difficult to get lost. It's more difficult to be like, okay, what do I do next? Do I just like explore? Like, what do I do?
Yeah, I totally agree, Jono. And I think the other thing as well that I felt because of that, even though, like I say, this preview feels quite vanilla in its setting, like I say, it doesn't do anything particularly magical or particularly crazy or particularly wild. But it did feel like everything was very bespoke. They didn't feel that as sometimes when you're walking across the wastes in the Commonwealth, it can feel a bit samey. You've got the feeling that assets are repeating. You walk into any shack and you'll find the same burnt books and bad chairs.
Exactly.
Whereas here, it did feel like actually it's big enough and everything is bespoke. We've really thought about how that particular rock formation is looking, or how that bay looks, or we've thought about this particular cave and what this is going to actually have in it. So it did feel like that handcraftedness was a key part of it. Now, whether that's borne out in the rest of the game, we'll have to see. But I really hope that if they've taken that approach, as you say, I sort of hesitate to say walled garden, but that kind of approach to let's see really make it meaningful.
Yeah, there's not going to be a lot of procedural generation here.
That I didn't feel like that to me from my time. I'm hoping that the focus will mean it will all be. And looking at some of the other preview material, they have put a lot of stuff out there in terms of videos, screenshots from presumably later in the game. It does look like that's going to be the case. There does look some really, really cool places, really cool biomes, cool settings to go to. It's just interesting. The preview is pretty safe. It is pretty what you'd expect from almost a fantasy RPG FPS.
Yeah. Before we move on, I just wanted to ask you about the overall presentation of the preview. I mean, I've looked at screenshots. I've been looking at this as we go. It has a very definite visual style to it. Yeah. I'm curious, the game looks good. It looks like a modern game, but like in terms of the visual style, did it grab you? Like as a fan of the Eternity games, did it really grab you? Do you think, oh yeah, this is the same world, but it's from a different perspective and it looks real good?
Yeah, and I think it grabbed me, Jono, because I think it was for any of our listeners who are really big fans, it was in the small details. So even silly things like, the fonts, the callback to the fonts from the previous two games, it still does the highlighted lore words in the dialogue. So although you can't hover over them, you can kind of, at the end of a dialogue, you can bring up a menu and go through any words that are in blue. And I thought, that's so cool. They've still got a real penchant for wanting that to be part of the world. And just in cool things like the way that actually the statistics, although it is now real time, the statistics still play into, increasing your strength or increasing your essence in the same way they used to do. So the presentation, I felt, really does pull in quite a nuanced way from the previous two games. I think where it probably needs to establish an identity, and this is why I'm looking forward to the rest of the game, is, as I say, in its characterization, in its monsters, in its world. It just felt a little bit vanilla, but it did play very, very well. It was smooth. It's obviously quite far along. I know that Obsidian moved the release date on the back of Xbox Game Studios, I think, sort of moving it for them. So I do think it plays well. There weren't any, major problems. There's obviously still an optimization pass to go, I would think. But no, in terms of presentation, it was those nuanced bits that really did it for me. The commitment to actually, this is what we did well in the last two games, and pulling that through. I just hope that, as the game opens up and once the game's released, that continues.
I hope so too. How's the voice acting? I understand this preview has like complete voice acting.
Yeah, the voice acting was pretty much all there. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I actually preferred it more to the recent Dragon Age one. I thought it was more realistic. It was more earthy. I think for those folk who've played the Deadfire, the second game in the Pillars, I thought it had some great voice acting there. It was real commitment to lots of lengthy lines and really detailed lore. And it seems that the voice acting is going for that sort of style. Things are delivered in a manner where it feels quite human, it feels quite realistic, it's got that sense of weight. You don't feel like anything's been hammed up or, where characters are very broad brushes. You get the feeling that it's going to be a game where you're going to see those shades of grey. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it too. And there are things about this game which I suspect they're going to get dinged by both reviewers and gamers. Like, for example, there's no romanceable options in this. No. You can't romance your companions, which, coming off something like Baldur's Gate 3, for example, I imagine that there is going to be some criticism about that. I think it's a perfectly legitimate choice. And to be honest, led to like some of the more interesting quests in the Outer Worlds, where Bavardi had a crush on the engineer of one of the ships, and you were you were working to get them together and to like set them up with their first date. And that was a delightful, delightful quest that I loved. So I think it's more interesting to explore the characters, because your character in these games is almost always just a blank cipher. Like you don't have a character. It's a role-playing game in the purest sense. So I like being able to help your companions and set them up, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, Jono, because I mean, I'm thinking back to the Outer Worlds, I guess, as a point of comparison. It was very, very open. You know, you're really starting from stasis and you've got a bit of a mission, but who you are is basically your choice. I think what's been interesting in Avowed is how, you know, your character is set. So, you're an envoy for the Emperor of the Aderian Empire. You're a godlike, so your ancestry is pretty much defined. You don't have a way to change that other than a really good suite of, customization, which I think you'd expect in any game of this type. But what was interesting now, and I think it goes into perhaps what they're trying to do in having a really focused narrative story and narrative set of choices, by setting you in that position. You're in a position of authority, you are a godlike, there's a separate ability tree, which I think looks like it's going to tie into being a godlike. I think they're obviously wanting a much more focused activity around that particular characterization of what that might mean, how people respond to you as being an ancestry that's a bit mysterious and a bit unusual even in the aura. But I do think you're right that maybe some folk who would look and go, well, that's not a blank slate. I've not got full control. I want to play an Orlan. I want to play another member of the kit. But it's not going to be the case in Avowed. Avowed is all about, this is what we're presenting. Yes, you've got customization, but this is who you are. This is how you start. This is this story. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how both reviewers, gamers, folk pick up on that, because I think that is something that I think is different from some of their core stuff. It's not what they did in New Vegas. It's not what they did in Outer Worlds. So that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I have very high hopes for this game. I've been excited since it was announced. Every single time I see footage of it or hear something about it, and I certainly reading your preview, I'm going, yes, come on. February, because it comes out on February 18th, I think.
Yes. Yeah, and it feels very ready, so hopefully there'll not be any more delays.
Yeah, I'm really hoping this is good, and I really hope that it delivers a solid role-playing experience that hopefully will have some good replayability too, so it lasts much longer in the public consciousness than just like a one and done.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for coming on, and thank you very much for taking on this preview. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about the actual full game in a few months, because it's just a few months until February 18th, which is crazy.
It is. It's not long.
No, it's not long at all. Okay, so I'm gonna want to pivot now from a first-person spin-off to a relatively long-running series, to a spiritual successor, I guess, of a series that is still continuing, but some would argue that this one is doing it better. So, Zach, I'd like to bring you in now to talk about Path of Exile 2. Now, this game has a very interesting background. So, Grinding Gear Games was founded in 2016, and right off the bat, they wanted to create a very deep action RPG that was very much in line with Diablo 2 at the time. When Diablo 2 came out, I remember playing Diablo 2 when it first came out, and it was amazing. It exploded. Then Diablo 3 came out, and it did not have quite the same reaction. And a lot of people started looking for alternatives, and some people found Torchlight 2, and a lot of people found Path of Exile. So it was officially launched in 2013, and the big difference between Path of Exile and Diablo and Torchlight is that it was free to play, which was astonishing, because it wasn't free to play in the sense that, like, oh, you have to pay to win. It's full of microtransactions. You have to do blah, blah. No, like, it was free to play. You could go in, you could play the whole damn game without buying and spending a cent. A lot of their monetization was through cosmetic choices and things like this. And this game managed to not only survive, but absolutely thrive for years and years through seasonal updates, various other kinds of DLC, new mechanics, new content, new lore, leagues started up. And this massive community, Path of Exile community, is a very, very passionate community to this day. So a few years ago in 2019, they announced that they are going to be releasing Path of Exile 2, and it was not going to be a new game. It was going to be an extensive overhaul of Path of Exile 1. And, a news kind of went out over time about this, and then slowly, Path of Exile 2 apparently started to develop into a standalone game apart from the first Path of Exile, which apparently will continue to be supported into the future, though I can't help but feel that the actual support will gradually fade over time as Path of Exile 2 hopefully gains more popularity. So yeah, this was supposed to be released in 2021. It wasn't, obviously. It's 3 years later. The COVID pandemic really knocked them for a while and knocked development into a while. But finally, this game is in early access. We're probably going to get it at some point next year. And I got to say, it looks good. Now, before we get to the actual game, I want to ask Zach about your experience with this hands-on preview, because this wasn't just a download the Steam build at your house kind of preview. You were invited to LA for the preview event. So can you tell me what that was like, and like the whole, just paint me a picture?
It was just beyond my wildest expectations, I think. So they had like builds for everyone with like very high-end hardware, like I think RTX 4080 Super. And
hard to beat that.
And they, like, a lot of the developers, and I think there were more like employees there than people invited to the event, just so we could have kind of the experience that they wanted us to have.
Mm-hmm.
So that was definitely like an interesting experience. They had all the game modes, like the couch co-op, like controller support, obviously the keyboard support.
Yeah, so they really did try to give everyone the best possible experience of the game, which honestly is what you want to do if you are a developer. Out of curiosity, do you have any experience with the first game, Path of Exile?
I did not, but I played just some before I went to the event, just so I wouldn't, like, I would know like some aspects of like what they're looking for.
Do your research, basically. And you do your research. I played Path of Exile when it was first released, and I was a little bit... I liked Diablo 3. I didn't love it. I didn't fall in love with it, but at the time I was like, yeah, this is good. This is fine. This is fun. It's a good click action based RPG. And then I played Path of Exile because I was craving it at the time. I think I went Titan's Quest at the time, certainly Torchlight 2. And then I hit Path of Exile, and this is Path of Exile, especially when it was first released, was a flat out Diablo clone. Like, it was the same, like, you have your orb of health on the left, you have your mana orb on the right. It looked darker than Diablo, though. It felt more adult in a way, and it felt much more... gritty isn't quite the wrong word, but there was a certain quality to it that felt more adult, I guess you could say. I'm curious, does that... now, to be fair, it has been years since I played it, but does that kind of carry over to Path of Exile 2's visual presentation and atmosphere? Like, how does it... I guess just how does the visual presentation feel to you?
So what's interesting is the director, Jonathan Rogers, actually talked to us about this.
Mm-hmm.
They're going for kind of that dark atmosphere,
mm-hmm.
but certain acts within the game are actually based on like where their studio is, like New Zealand. So they try to incorporate different like aspects of I guess like where they live, like their own experiences.
So what I'm hearing is there's going to be a lot of hobbits in this game.
But still make it like dark. Even if, for example, Act 2 is a little bit like lighter in terms of the color, like it's during the day, but
mm-hmm.
you can still feel the, I guess, oppressive atmosphere.
Yeah.
So that was definitely an interesting experience.
One of the interesting things about this hands-on event was that they have released footage, and there had been some previews in the past, but it really did focus on the earlier bit of the game, whereas this particular event was focusing very strongly on the end game. Why do you think this was?
I think they wanted to do something different from the other previews, because the game now is, I guess, almost complete. So
it's in early access. You can get it right now.
Yeah, so they wanted us to have like a different experience compared to... Because some of the people who were at the preview were at the previous ones. So they
mm-hmm.
wanted to highlight the differences with this specific preview.
Yeah. These preview events are always really tricky to me. And I mean, obviously, when you sit down and they invite you to these things, they really do put their best foot forward. And they try to, well, for lack of a better word, seduce the journalists in the room. Bethesda were experts at this. Like I remember the rollout for Fallout 76 was like, it was masterful. If they put half the effort into the damn game that they did into the press rollout, the game would have been amazing. But this doesn't feel like that based on what you've told me and based on what I've seen from this event. This really does feel that they wanted to give people a real feel of what the end game of Path of Exile 2 is going to be like. And I'm just curious, like, what end game design decisions did they make that you think is going to contribute to Path of Exile's 2's the gamers being attracted to it?
There are going to be at least 7 in-game modes, so they focus very much on that, to the point where they even shortened the story aspect, at least for now, and they're adding that part later, because they want to appeal to that hardcore audience. I think they had 44 million people who played the original, so they want to appeal to that hardcore audience by focusing on the end game. That's something that they emphasize quite a lot. But obviously they want to grow their player base, so they also have to take into account newer players, right? Who might kind of be turned off by that. So that was kind of a balancing decision that they had to think about just throughout development.
Yeah, and I mean the post game, or the end game, and then again the post game needs to be able to offer players varied experiences, especially because while this is not like a game as a service like World of Warcraft, for example, constant content updates are a feature of the Path of Exile series. Because I mean, the game today is, if I played the first one today, I would probably not even be able to recognize it based on my experience playing it back in the early 2010s. So clearly, they want to be able to create an end game that keeps players playing long term, and of course, investing in cosmetics for their characters and their spells and their abilities.
Yeah, it's interesting because the director mentioned that some players spent thousands of dollars just on cosmetics in Path of Exile 1. And I guess they're considering rewarding some of those players, but it definitely has a very like hardcore fan base.
Yeah, and it's miraculous to me that they make any money at all, because their monetization scheme is not predatory at all, from what I can tell and from my research. Like, it's genuinely probably one of the most generous free-to-play games I've ever seen.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's weird in a good way. Do not get me wrong. I'm not saying they shouldn't continue to do this, or others should not be inspired by their success. One of the things that Path of Exile 1 offered was a extraordinary depth of character customization and gameplay, as compared to a lot of action RPGs of this like. I believe years ago they compared it to wanting to do something like something they're inspired by Final Fantasy X, I believe. I suspect that if they want to engage players of Path of Exile 1, that they're going to have to offer a similar level of customization now. Can you give me an idea about what the level of complexity that we can expect here is for the upgrade paths?
So the best way to sum it up is it's Path of Exile 1, but a lot more. So, for example, the sphere grid system, basically from Final Fantasy X, is there, but there's also a specialization system where, like, if you pick Warrior, for example, you can kind of upgrade it into, I think, 3 different options. They only showed us a couple options just in the demo, but
limited time.
It changes the sphere grid, basically, so you get different options, different skills, different upgrades, so that you can specialize even more into what you want. And I think that helps reduce the impact of RNG at times. So there are options where you can kind of re-roll the benefits of your gear. Sometimes your gear can have like advantages and drawbacks, and you can try to re-roll the drawbacks, for example. And I think that helps. I don't want to say reduce the grind, because there are more in-game modes, but it helps you focus more on the content of the game.
That makes sense. I imagine that it also tremendously contributes to overall replayability of the game, considering there are just so many different choices that you can, and so many different paths on the, again, let's just call it the sphere grid, that you can follow, and that definitely would contribute to playing this long after you quote unquote beat the game.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the other things that is very important in games like this is, of course, loot. I mean, loot it. You kill an enemy, they drop a sword, you pick it up, and you go, "Ooh, it's green." And it's a special sword, and it does things to my stats, and is an awesome sword. What does the loot system here look like, and how does it contribute to the overall sense of progression and character growth in the game? I guess alongside the sphere grid. We probably should figure out what it's actually called and stop calling it the sphere grid.
The loot system is, I would say, similar to the Diablo games, except now you get different kinds of loot where you can use to kind of change the characteristics of your loot. So if you get, like a red, extremely rare item, but it has bonuses that don't apply to you, you can try to take advantage of the other in-game systems, like the rewards for them. There are certain gems that you can use to change those benefits. So.
FYI, it is called the passive skill tree, which is not nearly as catchy as sphere grid.
No.
So that's something they should probably think about and try to figure out a solution that doesn't get them sued. The game itself, I mean, obviously there's a lot of loot. There's tremendous character customization. The first game introduced, over the last 10 plus years, a tremendous amount of lore and world building. And I imagine that one of the challenges of Path of Exile 2 is going to be making it accessible to new players without making them feel completely overwhelmed by the amount of lore that's available. Seeing as you didn't have I know you played it to your research, but when you went into it, did you feel overwhelmed by the amount of lore that was available, or did it feel accessible and interesting as a standalone sequel?
So they don't want us to show certain aspects in video format because they're going to release them as trailers. But the story in this game will have full cutscenes that weren't available in the original. So it's going to be a full story with cutscenes that works well as a standalone. I think it's set at a different time from the original. So
I think one of the tricks when it comes to developing a sequel or a spin-off that is set in the same world, and this actually goes for Avowed too, so Mark, you can actually chime in here. One of the tricks about that is writers can easily fall into the trap that they have to pay lip service to what has happened before. They have this beautifully developed world that has been developed over the course of a couple of games or many, many years, or if it's a television show, and this is a spin-off, maybe a previous series of the last 6 seasons, and they feel beholden to reference what happened before throughout the games, rather than just tell a brand new story in this pre-existing world where they can it's not they're ignoring what they said before, but it's that's another part of the world. That's over there. We're not talking about that now. We're going to do something new, but set in this world. Do you think Path of Exiles 2 is going to succeed in that? Is it going to tell a story that stands alone without knowledge of the first game? And I guess same question for Avowed after this.
Yes, I think so. I think I was able to follow along pretty well, so I don't think there will be any concerns in that. What is interesting is that the director mentioned that, so they spent a lot of time and money on these full cutscenes, and they were thinking of whether it's necessary or not. So they had focus groups play the game with and without the cutscenes, and the groups that played with the cutscenes thought it was a better game. So I guess the story aspect definitely added to the overall game.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I would add for Avowed, I think it's a similar sort of thing. If you've got knowledge of the previous 2 games, I think then that you'll take that through. There's lots of callbacks, and you'll have that smile on your face. But actually, the way they've structured it to go to an area of the aura that we've not gone to before, you're playing a role which is quite open and new. There's nothing that really ties you plot-wise from the events of the first 2 games. So I think as a complete newcomer to the Pillars world, I think it serves as a good introduction. The links data there. But I think if you just want to come and enjoy a good RPG, I think that's something that you'll definitely be able to do.
One of my biggest critiques about fan culture nowadays, and it's not actually not even the fans' fault, people who make the content, is that everything has become the meme of Leonardo DiCaprio pointing, where it's like everything needs to have that moment where you're like, yeah, I recognize that. I mean, that's one of my biggest problems with modern day Star Trek, is that it's so beholden to what came before that every single season, almost every single episode needs to have a moment where you point at the screen and go, "Hey, they said Picard. I know who that is." And I feel like the art of making something that stands by itself and stands as something that will hopefully be memed and referenced in the future is to, it's set in the same world. It uses the same conventions. They live in the same society maybe, but like it's a big world. And I like the idea that games like Avowed and Path of Exile 2 can tell a story that isn't necessarily beholden to previous characters or previous events. Like maybe, I don't know, this isn't happening in either game, but just like writing off the top of my head, maybe if there's a location that's a library and you go inside and you open a book and it like references something that happened like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and it's like, oh yeah, that was me. But like it has no real relevance to the character's current situation or what they're doing. I think that's fine. So I have a lot of hope for both of these games that they are going to be able to tell stories that are not beholden to their previous entries or the previous games that are set in this world. Zach, I guess my final question for you is, based on your hands-on experience, are you excited to play the full release of Path of Exile 2?
I will say tentatively yes, but I do know that these games can take hundreds of hours. So it's a significant time investment.
I think that's part of the problem with reviewing a game like this, especially a game that's designed for long-term play, is that as a reviewer, we don't really have time for a long-term play. If we're real lucky, we get a review code 2 weeks before the game is released. And though it's doable to play from beginning to end, oftentimes to do so, we do have to miss side content, or we can't explore extensive end games. So Path of Exile 2, and certainly Path of Exile 1 is a good example of this, is going to be tricky to review. I think we're going to try it anyway, but it's going to be tricky to review because there's going to be so much after the game is over that lasts for many, many years. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. Anyway, Zach, I want to really thank you for not just writing the preview, but also, making the trek to LA and doing this whole thing. It sounds like it was a really cool experience, but it also was time commitment and lots of other things. So thank you so much for doing that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mind, I guess, going to LA because my fiance's family lives like just a few minutes away from the airport. So like all the events there like aren't like as long as I have the time, it's
anytime you want to send me to LA, I'm good. Cool. Okay, well, let's move on to the discussion question now. And that is going to be something that's going to be happening in a few days, and that is the Game Awards. So the Game Award nominees were announced last week, and predictably there has been some controversy because nothing can be done now without controversy. And the big controversy this year is whether DLC should be allowed to count for Game of the Year, because in years past, there have been some pretty spectacular pieces of DLC that were not eligible for Game of the Year. But this year, Elden Ring Shadows of the Erdtree is nominated for Game of the Year. And this has caused some controversy. And I think a lot of that anger is just internet chatter, to be honest. I actually think it's the right call to make. I think if a DLC is big enough, from what I have heard, Shadow of the Erdtree is big enough to be its own frigging game. So I don't have a problem with it. But I'm curious what you two think about the nominees, if you think any games were passed over, and what you predict will be the big winner of the night.
So I think in a lot of websites, I think RPG Fan included, there's a separation between, I guess, DLC and expansions, where expansions are DLC, but sometimes DLC has that negative connotation of, like horse armor is DLC, right? So I think at least Bandai Namco try to market Shadow of the Erdtree as an expansion. And I think it does have enough content, but I also understand that there's the argument that you have to have the base game to play the DLC. So
It's technically not standalone.
right. So that's kind of part of the argument, I guess.
Yeah, I think, my view would be the same. I haven't played Shadow of Erdtree. I don't know how big it is, but I suppose I'm thinking of examples like, where the Cyberpunk expansion, Phantom Liberty, that was a DLC, a lot of story content, but from what I understand, it's nowhere near the size of what Shadow would be. The only thing I can compare it to in years past would be, XCOM War of the Chosen is a different genre, but, another massive, reinvention of the entire game, really, a complete set of new systems. But I suppose it's the way we are. Depending on how publishers, developers market it. Is it an expansion? How big is it? And maybe Shadow is just an example of an extreme example of a huge one, and therefore it's okay to straddle that divide this time.
I think it's fine. I mean, as long as they're consistent with it going into the future. I think it's fine. Like, if this is the last piece of DLC that is, and the only reason it got Game of the Year is because it's Elden Ring's DLC, that would be inexcusable. But if going into the future, DLC or expansions of this type are allowed, then I don't have a problem with it. This is just a new precedent. In which case, and as long as they stick with that precedent, fine. I'm not saying that a DLC should be nominated every year, but if there's DLC that's worthy of it, yeah, sure, go ahead. In terms of stuff that I think was passed over, to be honest, I really like the Game of the Year list. It looks good. Arguably, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth is missing from it.
Yeah.
But that is just because I am me. And to be fair, it did get nominated in some other places, though again, not as often as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to get a little bit more. I thought it was going to get a little bit more traction than it did. But anyway, I'll tell you the thing that I'll tell you what I want to win Game of the Year, and I think, honest to God, deserves it. To be fair, I've not played all of the games on Game of the Year. I think Balatro deserves to win Game of the Year. I'm not even kidding.
No.
It is so good. Oh my God, it's so good. I have my criticisms of it. The end game is not great. Like, the enjoyment of Balatro is playing it, building your jokers, building your deck, customizing it, and like, that is so enjoyable. But I do admit that the end game every single time sucks, because you see it coming. When you're gonna be playing your final hand, because you're not going to be able to beat a score, and that is an unavoidable consequence of the game itself being poker and being score based. And there's also arguably not a feeling of progression in the same way that, like, say, Hades was. But holy crap, is it good! Oh my God, it's so good. What do you two think the Game of the Year should be?
I think
either the one listed there or any other one.
I think my head says the same as you, John. Actually, I think Balatro will actually be a strong candidate. It's a good gateway game, isn't it, as well? It's one of those games where, for the Game Awards, a lot of different types of gamers are playing it, because it's well designed and it offers a way in. So my head sort of thinks that could be the strong contender. I would love Metaphor to win it, just because I think the Atlas story is so incredible. I was just thinking back to when the list got released. I think one of my very first true games that I loved with Atlas was Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. I don't know if it was titled differently over in North America, just about 2003, 2004. And literally, it was hard enough to find the game, let alone someone who would talk about it or know about it or, understand about the fusions, understand about, the difficult bosses. And yet now we're talking about Atlas with a game that's been nominated in the Game of the Year category, that's got much more of a sense of the community knowing about it, and people talking about it. I think it's just an incredible game, and I think it's an incredible story of a developer that's just gone to strength and strength, and just making well-designed, well-narrated, strong role-playing games.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, because if I said Metaphor, it would definitely be coming from kind of a biased point of view, because, like, pre-release, I played through it 3 times, made sure I did all the side content, had the first platinum, I guess, and
yes, yes, if I recall correctly, you liked it,
and made sure I had, like, all of that, made sure I did everything before I finished the review, I guess.
Yeah, you gave it what was it? You gave it like an 80 something. Was that it? No, that was higher than that, I think.
98.
Yeah, there was an 8 in there somewhere.
So I also liked Rebirth a lot. Like, I played that pre-release at the time as well, and I had a great experience. I think it was just a fantastic, I would say, like adaptation of the original. So I think Rebirth would, I guess, I mean, this isn't really like a factor in terms of my opinion, but there's definitely a sales boost that comes with Game of the Year, because like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate just exploded after the event. So I think Square Enix is really, I guess, looking for that.
I would imagine they're looking for that, because they are. I don't think it matters how much a game sells; they're never content with it. But Rebirth undershot their expectations.
Yeah.
To be fair, it also undershot my expectations, but that's a whole other story. I know what you mean, though, with the sales boost. One of the funniest things is I recently joined Blue Sky, and there are a lot of posts right now from just random people, because I follow a lot of people who are in games, and there are 2 posts, and one is like, post this morning. Well, I guess I'm going to check out Balatro and see what this is all about. And then there's a post like 6 hours later that just says, well, I guess this is my life now. So yeah, I have real hopes that being nominated, Balatro is going to get a massive boost. I am such a fan of this game. I mean, it's not just because it's Canadian, although I'm not going to lie. Yes. But I mean, if it doesn't win best indie, best debut indie, and best mobile, I think that they should just pack up their and go home. I don't think it's going to win best game of the year. I think that you are probably right. I think it's probably going to end up being Metaphor. It might end up being Erdtree, although I mean, because of the voting base, it's not just them picking it. I imagine that it being DLC will hurt it. I think Balatro would be the dark horse candidate, maybe, but I think Metaphor is probably going to get it. Rebirth, I would be very surprised if Rebirth gets it. I'll be stunned if Black Myth Wukong gets it. And I would be delighted to see Astrobot get it. I haven't played Astrobot yet, but I played the Astrobot game that came with the PS5 when it first came out, and I was like, okay, this is unironically one of my favorite gaming experiences I've had in years. This is so good. I would love to play a full game with this, and I still haven't played it yet. I'm going to try over Christmas.
What's interesting is, so from my perspective, I played all of them except for Balatro.
I don't want you to play Balatro because you are pretty productive on the site, and I do not want that productivity to drop off suddenly and not be able to see you again until the new year.
Don't worry, I love writing for the site, and I really appreciate like all the review opportunities I've had already. So
I'm not kidding though, Mark. Am I right? Like Balatro is just like, what the hell? How is this so good?
Yeah, it is one of those that just sucks you in. And like I say, I've got so many friends, colleagues, family members who, they'll sort of see what you're playing, and it's a way in, actually, show me what I'm doing. It's an accessible game in that respect. I think, it could have a chance. I think it's great that it's there for that reason. I think it shows that the Game Awards, it's not just about that core hardcore audience. There's a respect for well-designed gateway games as well. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. We will. And one of the things I do want to mention, and this is a bit of a programming note, is that because the Game Awards are going to be on December 12th this year, which is going to be 3 days after our usual posting date on Monday, we're going to be delaying the next episode of Random Encounter by just a few days. I called Jeff. I asked him to reschedule the Game Awards so we could cover it on Monday. He wouldn't do it. It's too bad. I know. I called in every favor I had, and it just didn't work. So the next episode of Random Encounter will likely be posted on Saturday, December 14th. And then after that, we will be returning to our regularly scheduled programming. So first, I want to thank both of you very much for coming on, talking about these games with me, previewing the games. Super appreciate everything you guys do for the site. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to be here. Yeah, great.
Cool. And if you listening would like to support the site, you can do so by visiting our shop. You can do so at www.rpgfan.com/shop. There are lots of things on the shop that are really, really cool. There are mugs, there are t-shirts. There is also our collaboration with Hyperplay RPG, and that is the RPG Fan Review Card Collection. And it is a showcase of nearly 300 of our review cards, as you can see on Instagram and our other social media channels of choice. Another way you can support us here is to check out the past episodes of Random Encounter. Last week, our episode was, again, a little late because we needed to hit the embargo for Dragon Quest III HD2D Remake and LEGO Horizon Adventures. I had a really good time chatting with Zach and Caitlin about them, and I think it's a pretty good episode. A little heads up, there is some political chat in there. So if that's a bit of a trigger for you right now, we don't talk about it until the very end. So you can listen to like literally 3/4 of the episode and then just shut it off at the end if you don't want to hear it, because I know it's a little bit triggering at the moment. Another one of our podcasts on the site is Retro Encounter, and we are just wrapping up Zelda month. And the last 2 episodes were focused on The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which is one of my all-time favorite games. It's one of the games that cemented my love of video games. And I was on both episodes, so check that out. And also, don't forget to check out the rest of Zelda month, because there were some pretty cool episodes in there. We also have Rhythm Encounter, which is RPG Fans Music Podcast. And last week was an episode called Tales of Rhythm, which, if you were not able to guess from the title, was focused on the music of the long-running Tales series. So if you are a Tales fan and wish to check out some of our panel's favorite tracks from that series, do yourself a favor and check it out. If you'd like to get in contact with us here, you can fire me off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. That can be fan mail, that can be ideas for future episodes, that can be discussion questions. If you have anything you'd like to hear me and the panel chat about, please fire it off to me. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. And you can also find me on Blue Sky at johnologan.bluesky.social. I'm not the only person with a social media presence here. Mark, where can we find you online?
Yeah, so I can just be found through the RPG Contact. I really do need to get myself on the Blue Sky. I know we're having a big push for that, so that's one of my commitments I need to make.
I'll talk about that after we ask Zach. Zach, where can we find you online?
You can find me on Discord. I'm a tentative user.
Cool. Blue Sky, real quick. It's Twitter in 2015. Like it's a Twitter clone from 2015, and I'm not just talking about the design or the functionality. I mean, like in terms of the content too. It's fun. It's the first time I've had fun on a social media site for literally like since 2015. I'm getting content on there that it has nothing to do with negativity or anything. And I know it's because, Bloom's still on the rose. This is new. And things could go south real quick, but like, it's fun. I'm getting like random stuff and just like pictures, and there's no algorithm that's like shoving the most engagement in my face and trying to get me to post stuff. And it's really, really good. If you are listening and you have not enjoyed social media since 2015, much like myself, and you did used to enjoy Twitter, check it out because it's I'm having a lot of fun on it. I really am. And a lot of other people are having a lot of fun on it too. So I have to recommend that social media site. I really hope that I don't regret saying this, because who knows where it's going to go to. But right now, it's a lot of fun. Yeah. Anyway, so if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends. You can help us get the word out there. Rate us on iTunes or your other podcast players of choice. The episodes get posted, on Blue Sky and other social media channels. So if you see a post, like it, maybe comment on it. Tell me what you think. And again, Mark, Zach, thank you very much for joining me. Mark, it was your first episode. I hope it went well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Great to be with you guys. Great to talk about the games we love.
Absolutely it is. And to everybody out there listening, whatever you're playing, have fun.